In order to foster stimulating dialogue, what we decided to do was to create a debate format. What we'd like for you to do today is to put yourself in the shoes of the funder. So imagine that you have $20 million that you're going to commit to programming around an issue of youth-led violence. Basically, youth-led violence is an issue where youth take a lead role in recruiting and motivating their peers. And so we have a prevention team here and a mitigation team, and each of our teams will try to convince you to invest in funding their program.
So I hope this conversation will provide us with these practicalities, but as we hear them, we'll also ask ourselves what unites them in terms of purpose and principle, and how can we craft that message so we can get it understood by people and get them to act.
The goal for youth violence prevention is to stop youth violence from happening in the first place. The Illinois Center for Violence Prevention estimates that violence costs the United States $425 billion in direct and indirect costs each year. Of these costs, approximately $90 billion is spent on criminal justice systems, $65 billion on security, $5 billion on treatment of victims, and $170 billion on lost productivity and quality of life. Not only are prevention approaches more beneficial, prevention strategies cost less over the long run than mandatory sentencing and other get-tough approaches.
In spite of that, there's this idea that young people are violent, that we need to worry about the youth bulge and have responses to prevent youth violence and so on. And I don't disagree with that. I think that's important. After we did the World Development Report, we did a kind of extended book tour around the world, and two things came up in conversation all the time in every single country: jobs and violence. That was the major concern among young people and among policymakers and academics.
First of all, a little metaphor. What do you do when a building is already on fire? What do you need? Anyone?
Water.
When it's already on fire, we need fire retardant buildings, right? We need to build them right then. All right? Our argument is say, sometimes we need fire extinguishers, and those are useful because waiting for new fire retardant buildings aren't going to do the job at that point, okay? If the building's already on fire.
But this isn't a story about the Haven, it's a story about numbers. Basically, we are tracked externally by the federal government with our program, and 85% of our students graduate from the program, 100% of them are employed, and after 3 years, 85 to 90% of them are still in their jobs, and only about 10% get rearrested. And that program has been going on for over 15 years. The program works, and we're very proud of that.
Part of my research actually deals with the way that education is crucial for human capital development, social capital, all that, but it also raises expectations. So if you come out of an education, if you come out of a formal education system, you cannot find employment that you want, you actually are more likely to be involved in violence. So the education link is not as straightforward. You get education, you don't get involved in violence. It actually it's a lot more complicated than that. And actually education is a big piece of why people become involved, because their expectations are raised with education.
And one of the things that I did look at was a 10-year study of arrests of young people under 18. The overall number of arrests had decreased 9.2% overall. But there had been an 18.8 increase in girls being arrested. And in relation to violent crimes, 25% of girls. And then I was struck, very similar to the first question, is that somewhat of an invisible community, somewhat of an invisible population, just in terms of press, in terms of design of programs in the prison system, or the punishment side of the equation. So it is interesting to see that not only perhaps the comment that you were making, John, but also in actual arrests, girls in both, and you probably see this at the center, in terms of girl gangs and in terms of violence, girls are becoming a much more prominent population, and sometimes our programs are geared towards boys or semi-men, almost men.
I think even in my own institution, that's hard. And part of it is the nature of prevention versus cure, right? If you have some sort of prevention program, it's very hard to attribute the lack of something happening with what you did, right? Something didn't happen. You can't prove that it was what you did that actually prevented it from happening. On the cure side, if someone is ill, to continue the metaphor, if someone is ill and you provide them some intervention, you can pretty closely attribute the cure to your intervention. So part of it is in the nature of the work. It's very hard to attribute the lack of war to your peace-building intervention. It could have been something totally different. So part of it is in the nature of the incentives that policymakers face. That it's harder for them to focus on this where the perceived returns to them in terms of the political economy are much fuzzier.
The mitigation side of this would also say, as we can frame this as a security question as well, I think there's a great hook to policymakers of saying, you need to invest here, because if not, there's risks for the future. And I think then it offers the opportunity to start to talk about prevention as well, but the mitigation arguments gets their attention. And then you can talk about more broad-based, long-ranging programs. But if you can't offer to put out the fire, or at least calm it down, they're never going to invest in the other, they're not going to invest in building more fire retardant.
We'd like to have the mitigation team come up and accept their check.
Hey.